Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, Attorney Kim Hegwood with Hegwood Law Group, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning and welcome to Life Happens. Today our very special guest is Greg Shelley, who's the program manager for Harris County Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program at Cizik School of Nursing at UTHealth. That's a mouthful. So,
yes, it is.
And so, today we're going to be talking about, should, long-term care facilities be required, to have backup generators? And so, and I'm sure that's had everything to do with the freeze, because I don't know about most people, but I have not been that cold in a very long time, being without, electricity. And so, but before we get started really quick, can you tell the listeners what an ombudsman does?
You bet. We're literally advocates for the folks who live in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. We support the residents and their decision-making rights, help educate them about their rights, and if they need our help, we help them exercise their rights. We provide information to facility staff, to families, and the general public about anything related to long-term care. And of course, ultimately, we identify different complaints and work to resolve them, of course, to the resident's satisfaction. And on the bigger scale, we advocate within the facility for changes that might bring about good care, and we advocate to state agencies and the legislature and even Congress for things we think might improve care in the nursing homes. And ultimately, we're there to protect the residents' rights.
Perfect. And a lot of people don't know what you do, so I wanted to make sure we got that out of the way. And so let's talk about the great freeze of 2021, of all things, So how were long-term care facilities, in Texas, with the freeze? Because basically, most people were without electricity. I know I was for about 3 or 4 days with random turn-ons, maybe for 30 minutes or an hour, a day. For me, it was long enough to make coffee, thank God. But how was it as far as long-term care facilities?
Well, pretty much the things that we experienced, they experienced, with the exception of them being on the emergency power grid. So if they had power outages, they probably weren't as long as they were in some of our personal homes. Nonetheless, we had widespread extreme cold and power outages across many of the facilities, and some damage to the facilities from ice and bursting pipes. So at the peak of it in February, there was 537 nursing homes and 606 of our assisted living facilities in Texas that reported some kind of problems. And we had 56 assisted livings that had to evacuate and 27 nursing facilities that had to evacuate. And many of those were related to having no power. And I personally learned some things I didn't realize, that how easy it is, especially for an older person, to have their body temperature lowered. Even to just 95 degrees could result in hypothermia. And if the facilities didn't have generators and most of them do not have generators that can actually power the heating and ventilation systems, they weren't able to keep the buildings warm. And then the rest of us, in Houston, we all experienced boil water issues, and some of the facilities got really resilient and had call outs to the public, and many people were bringing bottled water to the facilities to help them keep from having to evacuate. And I think for a lot of folks, they think that, what's the big deal about evacuating? Well, for older folks, there's a thing called transfer trauma that can result from just the experience, and all kinds of things can go wrong, as we've learned in previous hurricane seasons. One year we lost 23 nursing home residents who tried to evacuate during Hurricane Rita.
So it's my understanding that State Representative Ed Thompson out of Pearland is filed the House bill, because they're up there creating havoc at the moment, Ed Austin, that it's going to require nursing home, assisted living facilities to have some type of generator backup supply on site for future weather issues, whether it be cold, another 10 years cold, cold spill, or just in our area, a hurricane. are tornadoes, or if you're in, depending on what part of Texas you're in, you get a little bit of everything. And so how is that affecting how you're seeing things?
Well, we enthusiastically support that bill. There's also a very similar Senate bill out there, and we kind of got a little bit of a forewarning. Of course, the cold weather thing was a bit unusual to us, but the upcoming hurricane season is an obvious one to us. And let's call it our sister state in Florida, they've experienced some serious tragedies from facilities losing power in the summer and not being able to keep things as cool as they should. And they've lost many lives. As a result, they did pass legislation which requires nursing homes and assisted livings to have backup generators. And here in Texas right now, nursing homes are required to have emergency generators, but not necessarily ones that can power the heating and ventilation part to keep things cool or warm as necessary.
So do you find that, we're now having to have legislation in order to make this happen. Is this not something that a facility would think to be part of what they should have?
Yeah, I think some do and already do it on their own, of course, but that's not many. That's more of the exception. Right now in Texas, most nursing homes have a generator, and some can use it to heat and cool all or a significant part of the building at least. Most assisted living facilities don't have any kind of generator, and they don't have a requirement to do so either. Some of them have invested in generators because they know it's the right thing to do. But of course, money is a concern. It's a reasonable concern, and the industry does say the concern is all about money. But there's options to that. Nursing homes that are on Medicaid can have it covered under Medicaid. It's an allowable cost for Medicaid. And some of the assisted livings are providers under Medicaid as well, but a much smaller percentage, about 10% of the assisted living residents are on what's called Star Plus Medicaid. So they might not be able to have all the costs covered for Medicaid like the nursing homes would. But we know that generators can power heating and cooling in emergency, and like Florida requires its assisted livings and nursing homes. That'll help avoid evacuations, and evacuations very often are part of the big problem and cause more harm than good in some cases. And while sometimes it's the safest move, generally transfer trauma can occur, and they can safely otherwise shelter in place. And we would want that to be possible in the future, especially with this, the hurricane season coming up.
So are you getting pushback from the facilities in regards to this bill?
A little. It's generally the same issue. They're concerned about who's going to pay for it and how do we do that. And I think there's some discussions going on in terms of what compromises can be made to make it easier, especially on some of the smaller providers on the assisted living side, and to find ways to help them pay for it. Because in the long run, it's not just a safety issue, but it can actually save money. There's a lot of cost that goes in trying to plan and execute an evacuation, especially on a large scale, such as this Uri showed us, not just in our immediate area like the hurricanes generally are, but all across the state. So
what kind of compromises do you normally find? Is there something that you're aware of that facilities and our legislators are trying to, to come together to kind of get some compromises?
Yeah, I think it's about just exploring all the options for payment. Like with the nursing homes, there's much more options because the vast majority of our nursing homes do have Medicaid coverage and can find ways to get things like that paid for through that. Not all the assisted livings, on the other hand, they don't necessarily have that. And I certainly understand the concern about money. And I think that's part of the discussions that are going on right now with the authors of both the House and Senate bills, trying to find other resources to either assist them with being able to pay for it or help get it paid for outright in the general best interest of those residents.
Just out of curiosity, do you have any idea what it costs to put that kind of generator in a facility?
That's a great question.
I hate to put you on the spot like that.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if there was a particular range of, I'm assuming we're talking thousands of dollars, but are we talking hundreds of thousands of dollars? So
Yeah, I think for the smaller assisted livings, and when we're talking about those range from just your typical residential home, single family homes. Obviously, those can be powered by much smaller generators than a full nursing home. There's some other options to it in terms of not necessarily needing to power up the entire heating and ventilation system for a very large building, just to have one that could actually maybe keep a wing cool enough, and they could just move residents, to that hall and be able to take care of them there for the time being. Those kind of compromises instead of, because so many buildings are different. Some are very large and some are pretty small. On the other hand, some newer buildings like the Richard A. Anderson Texas State Veterans Home that was just opened a few years ago on the south side of Harris County, they were built in a very modern way, and they have an amazing generator that should be able to help them shelter in place. But I would say that one was probably on the higher end of cost, and obviously the bigger the building, the more expensive it is to generate. But specific price tags, I couldn't tell you.
And so, do you think this bill is going to pass?
We want it to, of course. Right now, both versions are pending in the respective committees. For the House, it's the Human Services Committee, and in the Senate, it's Health and Human Services. And we really need one to be voted out favorably in order to be able to move forward for a full vote by either of the chambers. And that's what we're rooting for. Prediction-wise, I have no idea, what the outcome is, but we're excited that it's made it this far, and there's been a lot of bipartisan discussion about it.
So if there's someone that, is a little more, wants it a little more than most, they should contact their congressman, right? And encourage them to help move that forward.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the public information was provided earlier in testimony, and the state ombudsman, Patty Ducaille, provided in-person testimony to the legislature at the time. And I think they've heard the general public pretty well, but it never hurts to, fill the ear of your local representatives to encourage them to do what you would like to have done.
Yeah, definitely. And so, most definitely. And so, well, I appreciate, Greg, you coming on today to kind of give us an update on that, because I think that's really important. The freeze kind of knocked everybody through a loop, because I'll be honest with you, I don't remember the one 10 years ago. And so I'm like, I know I couldn't have lost that much electricity, because I would think I would have remembered that. But, so it's like, I'm hoping it's another 10, 20 years before I have to worry about that sort of thing again. And, but I definitely wanted to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your information, because I think this is good for families. We have a lot of our families that are coming in, trying to figure out placement and, the best place. And now that, we give them, we can give them another option. You may want to check to find out, do they have a generator? What's the plan if they have no electricity, or, God forbid, a hurricane hits. And so that's really good, because I hadn't, in spite of the cold, I hadn't really thought about that being a factor in determining, facilities, but I think that could be very well a big factor, moving forward for families. So.
That's great. That's one of the things that we do as well. It's a really good idea when folks are looking for a place to go get care at, whether it's assisted living or nursing homes. Every county in the country has an ombudsman assigned, and it never hurts to reach out to them, because very often they know from personal visits what's going on in a facility at any time. And because of the number of facilities, we might not know those questions, the answers to those questions exactly. We can certainly get them for folks, including what's the emergency preparedness plans of facilities and whether or not they have generators.
Definitely. And thank you so much, Greg, for coming on today and giving us some good information. And I look forward to having you on again.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast, as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.